Oh, 2 minutes.
Okay, we will start. I hope all the speakers are here. Professor Annette, the Boschmita, Dr. Dries, as well as Dr. Suzanne. I'm Kshitij. This event is also going live on YouTube in case the participant list goes beyond 100. We are already about 56 people who are participating. And all these people are part of various organizations. And a very brief introduction to the event itself. Okay, so IBBN is the entity which is organizing this program today. IBBN is the India Biochar and Bioresources Network. This network is an outcome of a long collaboration between GIZ and RRAN. RRAN is a fairly popular network in India of academicians, researchers, and practitioners working on rainfare agriculture. And GIZ has partnered with RRAN for quite some time on various issues. And IBBN is an outcome of this particular association in India. As the name suggests, IBBN is essentially a network of various organizations of various kinds. We have farmers organizations for direct practitioners. We have civil society organizations, researchers who are doing work on agriculture as well as on climate change. We also have academic institutions, including the National Law School of India, which is helping us on the policy front. And IBBN has been started to fill the gap that exists in the country and probably beyond on looking at climate change from the perspective of agriculture. And as a solution, we are promoting the circular agriculture models and essentially looking at putting the atmospheric carbon back in the soil. And because social justice is so much a part of the work that IBBN does, the process of farmers putting carbon back into the soil, farmers getting away from chemical intensive green revolution based agricultural practices towards integrated farming systems must be incentivized. And the whole objective of this particular workshop, as well as IBBN, is to ensure that agriculture it becomes a very strong livelihood opportunity in the global south and is remunerative too. And it is multi-sectoral. So it's looking at governance, it is looking at economy, it is looking at science, it is also looking at food and nutrition security. So IBBN has a fairly large mandate. And today's program is essentially on biochar, and biochar is one of the two main topics that IBBN covers, biochar and bioresources on the other side. And biochar market is still evolving. It's still in its nascent stage. And even if it's even at the time when it is fledgling, it is important for farmers and organizations to know the opportunities that they have in being able to promote biochar. And we have four esteemed guests today from Australia, from India, from Africa, and from Europe. And they'll be speaking, and their introduction will be done by my colleague from GIZ here in India, Yunus. He'll come in next. So, we know the importance of biochar. We've all been exposed to extreme weathers, and the Indian monsoon, as well as the Indian summer, are part of what is called the tipping points. These are part of the 11 tipping points identified by scientists across the world. And we are already looking at extreme weather in India. It has been projected that this year in the southern peninsula of India, the temperature is going to be at least 1.5 degrees more. And in North India, they are saying that it can become unlivable. And there's a World Bank report that is going to be released later this week. And there's already a teaser to what is in the future for India. So looking at climate change from an agriculture perspective and how biochar, the production and the use of biochar can actually reduce atmospheric carbon and also improve the soil health on the other side are both so very important. And IBBN does this. Well, India, there's a humongous potential in terms of the feedstock that's available. We are the second largest agricultural country in the world. The feedstock, even conservative estimates, there's no mapping as such, but conservative mapping as far as the crop residue is concerned, at least a trillion metric tons of crop residue each year. I mean, the official statistics would be about 800 million. This leaves out urban waste as well as agroforestry. All put together is a huge potential for biochar in India. And if that can be monetized, and if farmers can gain from this monetization, it will be extremely good. So the market itself, and this is the last slide, before I get into the schedule itself. Now, there are various projections on the biochar market. When some projections say that there's at least half a billion dollar opportunity in the next 6 to 7 years, while the others say that $2 billion opportunity, and some actually go up to $6.37 billion. And if you look at the last picture, you can see that number one, most of the application of biochar is going to get into agriculture. The feedstock will also be largely agriculture as such. But then you also look at the pink color of where the market is going to grow. And you can see Asia Pacific will be where the major market growth will be in the next 5-6 years. So today we have a lot of organizations from India who are participating, who can benefit out of it. There will be a follow-up action on how to take this forward and how to reach the carbon market to the last farmer in the country, because you see the growth potential in the country itself. It's humongous. Now, the last bit of my introduction today would be the schedule itself. There would be some changes in the timings because some presenters might want to have a little bit more time and the others might want to cut short a little bit. So we've got Yunus Bartolome, who works in GIZ in India, who will give a quick introduction to the panelists. And there would be topic-based presentations by Professor Annette Debusschwitter, Dries, and Suzanne. After the presentations, we will have about 20 to 25 minutes of questions and answers. If you have question and answers, and if you have clarifications to seek, we have enough time for that, about 20, 25 minutes for that. And then we can quickly of course, this is not going to be completely participatory in nature, but then a brief plan that might emerge out of today's discussions would be put forth at the very last of this session. So this is a brief introduction to today's program. Welcome, all of you. Welcome to the speakers from 4 continents. Let's make the best out of this. Yunus, you can take over. Thank you.
Thank you, Kshitij. And as you already mentioned, we are trying to squeeze in a little bit more time for our speakers, so I will be also short. My name is Jonas Bartolome. I work for the German Development Corporation based out of New Delhi here in India. And I'm actually very excited to see so many participants. So right now I can see 90 participants. This is great for the India Biochar and Bioresources Network. And I just want to leave maybe one sentence for you to also understand where GIZ, the German Development Corporation, is coming from and why we saw the need to initiate this entire IBBN network together with RRA. That is also why I'm so excited that now so many participants have already registered and are also here in this call. Looking at various aspects of regenerative agricultural practices, looking at all of these different institutions, private sector players, government representatives, but of course also the farmers and farmer producing organizations. We saw actually a gap in connecting all of these players within this large country in India, and to create a joint platform where we can, exchange knowledge, start discussions, start debating, get together in workshops and conferences, but also, just to get connected and have a stronger network. Especially on the topic on biochar, we realized that this is still, quite unfamiliar to most players within the country. And that is why we as GIZ, together with our partner RIA, we decided to create this network, and very thrilled again to see so many participants here. I would like to also once again highlight, Kshitish has overlooked this, but I'm again promoting because Kshitish and the entire team, they have created a wonderful website, IBBN, India Biochar and Bioresources Network. Please have a look. We will also share the link once again in this chat. And also please register for our monthly newsletter. IBBN is now releasing on a regular basis this newsletter where we will update you on biochar and bioresources related topics, what is happening in the country, what is happening across the world. And this is also now my bridge to IBBN is not only trying to connect stakeholders and participants in India, but we would also like to, bring the world and the experiences on biochar and bioresources to India. And that is why we have also now set up this workshop today, because we have actually a very international session of speakers. The topic today will be biochar and the global carbon market opportunities. How can biochar activities be connected to voluntary carbon markets, but also other carbon market opportunities? We have 4 speakers. I would like to briefly introduce them to you, and just that you also know that who's participating here today. First, we have Professor Annette Cowie. She's a senior principal research scientist from the New South England University in Australia, a highly recognized biochar and carbon market expert. We're also working with her with GIZ since a long time. So thank you, Annette, for joining today. We have Ms. Debusmita De. She's a representative from VNV, private sector. They are actually one of the oldest players in India who are connecting farmers, farmer producing organizations, NGOs to the global carbon market in various aspects. Here, mostly also looking at agricultural services. And then next we have Dries Robrek. He's our colleague from Kenya, working as an associate scientist, working for IIT CGIAR Council in Nairobi. He has also very good and very in-depth knowledge about biochar, especially on the long-term storage potential of biochar. IITA has conducted a long-term study of what are the implications, what are the results of applying biochar in agricultural areas over a long period of time. I'm sure we will learn about this today also as well. And last but not least, we have also Susanne Feser. She's the founder and chairwoman of the German Biochar Network. So very excited to also connect various networks globally to India, and very excited to also hear what is happening in Germany on the topic of biochar, and also of how the German biochar is functioning and what we can also learn from them. So with that, I keep it short. Back to you, Kshitish. And again, thank you so much for participating.
Yeah, yes, thanks for that, Jonas. The IBBN website the link to the website has been uploaded in the chat box. And if you would want, regular updates, as well as if you want to become operational partners of IBBN, please feel free to log in and then put in your name in the registration tab. Thank you so much, Jonas. And now we welcome Professor Annette Cowie from Australia to make a presentation. Yeah, that's we can see this, Professor. You're on mute.
I'm sorry, the controls disappeared as soon as I started sharing the screen. I hope you are hearing and seeing me now. Thank you very much to IBBN for the invitation to speak to you today. I'm going to talk about the international policy context that's creating this opportunity for biochar, and then focus in on what exactly are the opportunities for biochar and how they're being realised and will be realised in the near future, we hope. So, oh dear, nice. Okay, at last, great. So the key policy that's driving carbon markets is the UNFCCC, the Framework Convention on Climate Change. And the current focus of the convention is the Paris Agreement, the historical agreement reached between world leaders in 2015. And this aims to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees. And the great achievement compared with the previous convention, the Kyoto Protocol, is that now all countries are on board. The Paris Agreement identifies that to achieve the temperature goal, the world needs to reach a position of net zero in the second half of the century. So that's a condition in which greenhouse gas emissions are balanced by greenhouse gas removals. In practice, that means carbon sequestration. I've been involved in the IPCC over the last few years, and the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, has the role of translating science for use by the policymakers in the UNFCCC. The IPCC doesn't do science as such, it assesses and synthesises the scientific literature to inform policymaking. In 2019, as part of the 6th assessment cycle, the IPCC released this report, this special report on climate change and land. And it looked at the very close relationship between climate change and the land, including the mitigation potential and the risks of using land for carbon dioxide removal. The report explains that the land is under pressure as a result of unsustainable land use, and that pressure is growing as a result of climate change. The soil is now being lost up to 100 times faster than it's being formed. And increasing and severe droughts, for example, leave land bare and susceptible to erosion, which causes land degradation, limits productivity, and contributes to greenhouse gas emissions at the same time. But the good news is that this very tight relationship between land and the climate means that if we improve our land management by applying sustainable land management practices, we can contribute to solving these problems together. So sustainable land management, where it increases carbon stock in soil and in vegetation, contributes to climate change mitigation and also addressing land degradation. The report reviewed many options for sustainable land management and found many practices that would deliver climate change mitigation and at the same time deliver benefits for climate change adaptation, managing land degradation and desertification, and enhancing food security. Building soil carbon and agroforestry are examples. But the report also identified 3 practices which they classed as having both risks and opportunities, and biochar fell into this category, as did bioenergy and bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, and afforestation. So what the policymakers were wanting emphasised here is that biochar can be done well and deliver benefits, but on the other hand, it could have disbenefits, for example, in particular, if biomass production to produce biochar displaces food production. Now, the 6th cycle is culminating in the 6th assessment report, and that comes in 3 volumes plus a synthesis report. And the first volume of the 6th assessment report was released in August last year. This volume focuses on the physical impacts of climate change. It tells us what we already know, that human activities are causing climate change. They've already caused over 1 degree of global warming above pre-industrial levels. And in fact, each of the past 4 decades has been sequentially the warmest on record since pre-industrial times. The evidence is now irrefutable that humans are causing climate change. We've seen the evidence all around us. In this year, just this year, for example, thousands of lives have been lost due to fires, floods, etc., caused by climate change. And it's been quantified at $29 billion worth of damage, US dollars worth of damage caused by climate change events just this year. And certainly this report concluded that unless there is immediate, rapid and large-scale reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, it will be beyond reach to meet that target of the Paris Agreement to limit warming to 1.5 degrees. One of the key findings of the first volume of the report was this very close relationship between the amount of CO2 emitted and the amount of warming. What this means is that all CO2 added to the atmosphere causes permanent warming. So the most important thing to do is to stop putting it there, and we're going to have to take some out as well. The second volume of the 6th assessment report focuses on adaptation, impacts and vulnerability. It was released in February, and it describes the impacts of climate change on human and natural systems and how these are going to be exacerbated by further climate change. So all the effects we're seeing already are going to be exacerbated, and this will have an increasingly large impact on agriculture and therefore on food security. The third part of the 6th assessment report was released in April. This is the part where I was a co-author, and it has some good news and some bad news. The sort of good news is that rate of growth in emissions has slowed. The bad news is we are definitely not on track to limiting warming to 2 degrees, let alone well below 2 degrees. The current policies are certainly not enough. The worst news is that the current pledges, the nationally determined contributions, are also not enough. So carbon dioxide removal will definitely be needed in order to get to that position of net zero. Some more goodish news. There are many mitigation options that are available now. They're affordable and they also have co-benefits for sustainable development. But on the other hand, many also involve trade-offs that need to be managed. The land sector has a really big role to play, but it certainly can't do it all. We need to focus on emissions reduction in the first place. Now, this is a really key statement. I've mentioned it already, but it's there starkly spelled out in the summary for policymakers that the deployment of carbon dioxide removal to counterbalance hard to abate residual emissions is unavoidable if we're going to get to net zero. And I think this is a really important statement for the biochar community, because biochar can certainly play a key role in delivering carbon dioxide removal. Now, there are many different pathways that the IPCC recognised in order to get to net zero. This is a stylised pathway, and it shows that we need to peak emissions very soon, and we need to, in fact, halve them by 2030 and get to a position of net zero CO2 about 2050. But this needs to be accompanied by increasing amounts of carbon dioxide removal here in the green below the line. As I said, there are many different pathways to get to net zero, and the IPCC report illustrates a range of different combinations of approaches that have different proportions of the different mitigation strategies. For example, different proportions of carbon capture and storage, different focus on non-CO2 emissions, different amounts of carbon dioxide removal. I would note that biochar is not actually included in these scenarios, because these scenarios are based on the integrated assessment models, and most of these do not include biochar at the moment. But there are several groups that are interested in including biochar from now on. Now, just in case there are people out there who don't know a lot about biochar, I just want to explain very briefly what biochar is. Biochar is taking biomass and heating it in a low oxygen environment. So you're creating a product that is essentially like charcoal, and then using it as a soil amendment usually, or various other applications that probably other speakers will mention. But the point is that you're not making charcoal as a fuel, you're making charcoal in order to store the carbon safely out of the atmosphere. The process of producing biochar is pyrolysis or gasification if it's at a higher temperature, and that produces a combustible gas at the same time, which can then be used as a renewable fuel source. Biochar can be made from a wide range of different biomass feedstocks, and it can be made at many different scales, from a small cook stove or a pit in the ground through to a large engineered plant that processes several tonnes per hour. The great thing about taking the biomass and converting it to biochar is that the carbon in that form is very stable. It's not easy for bugs to break it down, and it's estimated to last hundreds to thousands of years when used as a soil amendment, which is why it's recognised as a carbon dioxide removal strategy. But biochar has also been found to have many other benefits as a soil amendment. It can enhance water and nutrient holding capacities. It can mobilise contaminants such as heavy metals, and it can enhance phosphorus availability. And meta-analyses have found on average that it can increase yields by 10 to 40%. And this is in particular in tropical soils, low fertility, high phosphorus sorbing soils, for example, and also in sandy soils in the drylands, it's particularly beneficial. But please note the bottom line there, biochars differ dramatically depending on the feedstock and the temperature of pyrolysis, and so you do need to choose the biochar carefully for your particular application. I just thought I'd mention this paper, which was published last year in Global Change Biology, Bioenergy, and it attempts to synthesize all the biochar research. Biochar is actually quite a new topic for science, and most of the papers have been published, in fact, in the last 5 years, but the original papers go back to about the last 20 years. And so we synthesized the findings from all that literature to show how, or our current understanding of how biochar reacts in the soil and how it influences plant growth. And we also talk about how biochar supports climate change mitigation and food security and the circular economy. I thought I'd also mention this particularly interesting finding, which is that having put biochar into the soil, at least in some soil types, the soil carbon level continues to grow. Obviously, when you put the biochar into the soil carbon level goes up. But then over time, the presence of the biochar actually attracts the new organic matter leaking out of plant roots and from decomposing residues, and protects it in combination with the particular minerals in the soil, protects it from decomposition. And so they call this the negative priming effect. Now back to the sixth assessment report. The main text on biochar is found in the chapter on agriculture, forestry and other land uses, known as the AFOLU chapter. And it has 1.5 pages, which might not sound very much, but that's a fair share actually, because the other mitigation strategies have about as much space. And it makes some, I think, really useful statements. I'm sorry for all the words on this slide, but I think this is quite a useful paragraph, the critical assessment and conclusion that says that there is medium agreement and robust evidence that biochar has significant mitigation potential, and that it can offer various other advantages. And this is, I think, a really useful statement to focus the attention of policymakers on the potential benefits of biochar. The other part of the report that is important here is chapter 12 on cross-sectoral perspectives, that provides an assessment of all the different carbon dioxide removal methods. It presents this taxonomy of methods. It doesn't classify them in the way that's commonly applied of technological versus nature-based. It instead provides, I guess, maybe more objective classification. It's a matrix based on the removal process, so that is biological, chemical or geochemical, and the timescale of storage from decades through to millennia. Chapter 12 also shows how biochar and other land-based mitigation strategies can be integrated together to provide synergies. Now, a key part of an IPCC report is the summary for policymakers, and I need to explain how this originates. The rest of the report is put together by thousands of scientists, volunteers from around the world who aren't paid, who synthesize the literature and write the report, and thousands of others who review the report and provide comments that the authors then need to take into consideration. It goes through 2 rounds of review, including governments can provide comments, but then the report is essentially what the scientists have written. The summary for policymakers, on the other hand, is a negotiated document that is agreed by the coordinating lead authors of the report and the government representatives who make up the IPCC. And so the approval process is, well, at least when it's in person, about a week long. And when it was online, it was 2 weeks. And they go through the report line by line and agree on the text. So they call it a negotiated outcome. So this is the summary for policymakers from the AR6. And in the green are the more positive statements about biochar, and the red are the ones that are maybe a bit more negative. And so this is a balance between what the scientists were saying was the evidence for positive outcomes from biochar and what the policymakers were concerned about. And so what it emphasises here is that the policymakers are still concerned about the potential for adverse outcomes through poor implementation of biochar, including growing energy crops or biomass crops in places where food was previously grown. And they also insisted on a footnote that talks about potential risks and unknown aspects related to biochar, which told me that there's a lack of awareness of the current scientific knowledge of biochar and of the experience and knowledge that's been generated by the community of biochar users. So the policymakers don't have confidence that biochar is safe, and they doubt its mitigation potential. And so currently they're unwilling to create policy to incentivise it. So I think this is a challenge for all of us to convey the message that we do know enough about biochar to be confident it can be a significant part of the climate solution, and it can provide co-benefits. In particular, it can help to address many of the Sustainable Development Goals. And there are ways that we can integrate biomass production for biochar into our agricultural and forestry systems in ways that it doesn't need to displace food production. It can actually be beneficial, provide synergies and environmental benefits. So there are now nearly 140 countries that have implemented or are talking about implementing net zero strategies. And most have identified a big role for the land sector in their NDCs, nationally determined contributions. But as far as I'm aware, none of them specifically nominates biochar. This is the Australian example. We have national and also state level net zero policies. And while the governments around the world are busy taking on net zero targets, so are the companies. And this is where the opportunities for biochar are coming in the carbon market. So these are some of the initiatives out there that are encouraging companies to reduce their emissions and to take on carbon neutrality targets. There are various platforms that are generating credits that companies can purchase. And there are also initiatives to ensure that the carbon market has integrity. So on the right-hand side are the current initiatives about integrity. And on the left-hand side are some current initiatives that are going to require that companies make climate-related disclosures. And they are going to need to demonstrate that they're reducing their emissions, and they're going to need to demonstrate the integrity of any offsets that they purchase. I've mentioned carbon neutrality claims. There are various schemes around the countries. This is illustrating the Australian example, which is called the Climate Active Scheme, that provides carbon neutral certification for companies or products or even districts and buildings and events. When companies take on a carbon neutrality target, they're saying that they need to balance their emissions with removals across the whole life cycle of the product, for example. And if that doesn't reach zero, which it generally doesn't unless you're in the land sector and have the opportunity to plant a lot of trees, for example, then you'll need to purchase offsets. And carbon neutrality schemes require that a company first reduces its greenhouse gas emissions and sequesters carbon within its own territory, and finally offsets the residual emissions. Usually, at the moment, those offsets could be emissions reduction or removal projects that are generating the credits. But there are a number of initiatives now that are encouraging companies to look to removal offsets in particular, so that they can demonstrate that they've counterbalanced their emissions. And this is creating a particular opportunity for biochar. All the schemes have a set of integrity criteria that need to be met by projects that are generating credits. They need to demonstrate that the mitigation wouldn't have happened anyway, known as additionality. They need to demonstrate that it's evidence-based, that there's science to support the measure, and you're able to measure it and it's able to be verified that you have achieved that mitigation, that it's either permanent or has measures to address it, and that your project doesn't cause leakage. That is, you reduce your emissions but increase somebody else's somewhere else at the same time. Now, the measurement in relation to biochar has been a barrier, but that's been overcome lately. The last guidelines produced by the IPCC for countries to produce their national greenhouse gas inventories included this appendix, which shows how to quantify the carbon stabilised in biochar. So countries can now include that. It's not mandatory, it's optional for countries to include that in their inventories. See also the update from Dominic Wolf, who led the development of the annex, and the co-authors got together and subsequently updated that method. And that's the method that's behind the voluntary carbon market platforms that are now creating carbon credits from biochar. So it's a fairly simple approach. I think some of the other speakers might talk in more detail about how the carbon stability is estimated and included in creating credits from biochar. I'm trying to hurry up because I realise I'm running out of time. So sorry, I'm not providing any more detail here. The credits from the Puro platform have been purchased. Unfortunately, Microsoft didn't highlight that in the paper that they published about their purchase of carbon dioxide removal offsets. But in fact, Microsoft purchased Puro credits that were generated by a biochar project in Australia. And so just finishing up then, I would say that biochar is definitely ready for the carbon market. We're now able to demonstrate that it meets all the integrity criteria. We have a well-accepted evidence-based method for quantifying mitigation, that is carbon dioxide removal through biochar. We can demonstrate that it's safe. We have measures in place for quality control, which is one of the other concerns that was in the mind of the policymakers. So I would encourage you all, now is the time to promote biochar as the ideal climate change solution with multiple benefits. The need for urgent action is finally being recognised by governments who are announcing their net zero targets and by businesses who are aiming for carbon neutrality. There are now a range of voluntary and compliance schemes that are emerging to facilitate carbon markets, and although they've been slow to include biochar, that is finally changing. So now the need for carbon dioxide removal has been recognised in order to get to net zero. So let's make the most of this opportunity, promote biochar as a safe and durable carbon dioxide removal solution that delivers multiple benefits for society and the environment. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Professor. I think this, this whole thing that you mentioned about counterbalancing, the carbon in the air is so much more important for us because we cannot let this natural process take place anymore. There is a need for us to do things actively to take the carbon away from the air and put it back in the soil. I think this is where carbon plays so much more of an important role for all of us. Your presentation was very comprehensive. We will get back to it because I think there was also a lot of science and very specific points that we need to pursue much more as we go forward. Thank you so much. Please wait on because there are already questions coming in. Next up, we have Deboshmita. Debashmita is from VNV Advisory here in Bangalore, but she works from Delhi. And VNV Advisory is an organization which provides opportunities for organizations who would want to get into the carbon market. And I've already worked with her through an earlier organization, and our relationship with them has been extremely productive. So for organizations who are interested in India, VNV Advisory is a one-stop solution. Debashmita, please, yes. The floor is yours.
Yeah, Kshitij, can you project the presentation?
Yes, it's happening.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one?
Yeah, that's the one. Okay. Thank you for your kind introduction, Kshitij. Hello, everyone. I'm Debashmita De, working in the field of carbon offset for more than 3 years. I'm honored to be a part of this seminar, which is focusing on biochar and the carbon market opportunities related to it. So just to begin with what VNV Advisory does, Kshitij, can you move on to the next slide, please? Thank you. So we are a project developer based in Singapore and India, working with the climate resilient adaptation and mitigation programs that are predominantly community driven. Founded in 2007, we are working with various stakeholders for the carbon offset projects in areas of sustainable agriculture, social forestry, mangroves restoration, clean cooking, rural energy, clean water access, and waste management. Our community-led programs have impacted 6 million rural households, and it is still counting. We have successfully covered around 2 million hectares of land use and forestry management across more than 10 countries in the South Asian region. So we work with more than 100 implementation partners, and just to conceptualize, design, impact, and execute these technologies and on the ground. So VNV actively engages with businesses to address issues of social responsibility and the environmental sustainability along the supply chain. With collaborative efforts across several global platforms and networks, VNV is pledged to United Nations Global Compact and the Climate Neutral Now Global Reporting Initiative and the International Carbon Reduction and Offset Alliance. We deal with carbon finance, which refers to the local, national, or transnational financing drawn from the public, private, and alternative sources of financing that seeks to support these mitigation and adaptation actions that will address the climate change. Next slide, please. Thank you. We work with various implementation partners in India, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and so on. We are in the carbon markets for over 16 years and have mobilized over 1 billion for partners and projects so far. And as mentioned earlier, we are working with 6 million rural households and across 12 countries in the South Asian region. Next slide, please. Thank you. So there are several international regulatory standards that can validate a carbon program. VNV works predominantly with the gold standard and the Verra registries. So the gold standard and the Verra registries belong to the voluntary carbon market. They are termed as voluntary carbon market since it is based on the voluntary action taken by the companies, organizations, and the individuals that certify their emission reductions and offset their unavoidable emissions and display environmental integrity. So these carbon offset registries track offset projects and issue credits for each unit or removal that is verified and certified by the third-party auditor and the registries. The registries are vital in creating a credible offset commodity, and they record the ownership of the credits. And they also reduce the risk of double counting and make sure that the social and the environmental benefits are incorporated within the emission reductions or removals. The voluntary carbon market is significantly fluid, unstrained by the boundaries set by the nation states or by the political unions. It has the potential to be assessed by every sector of the economy rather than only selected industries, and thus drives innovations in project finance, monitoring, and methodologies that influence the carbon market. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the market has been constantly evolving over the last 30 years, and VNV has been around for half that time. The emission reductions have been equivalent to 239 metric tons of CO2 equivalent with a market value of $748 million, tracked as the annual transactions of the voluntary carbon offsets as of 31st August 2021. So this represents a 27% increase in the volume over 2020s, and potentially the first annual transactions will record a value of over $1 billion. Cumulative volume has now exceeded to 1.7 billion, and the demands for the offsets generated through the better management of forestry, land use, and renewable energy accounted for 88% of the issuances till August 2021, with a 139% jump in the volume percentage for forest and land use. By 2030, it is expected that the carbon market will be worth more than 50 billion. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this slide represents the addressable market size in 2030 by McKinsey and Company, which involves the 11 high potential value pools that are carbon management, industrials, waste, hydrogen, oil, gas and fuels, agriculture and land use, consumer, water, power, buildings and transport. And these 11 high potential value pools could be worth more than $12 trillion of yearly revenues by 2030 as the net zero transition advances. As you can see, the market size for the agriculture and land use could be $550 to $1,200 million by 2030, which includes the sustainable agriculture inputs and equipments, land and forest management, agriculture production, etc. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this slide represents the typical project cycle and the various process that we follow. The first step is basically to reach out to our clients or the implementers for the project details, and VNV chooses the most suitable pre-approved methodology that would be applicable to calculate the carbon credits. In case there is no pre-approved methodology available, VNV also develops methodology for the carbon offset projects. During this, a pre-feasibility assessment is also conducted, and the requirements and the guidelines are checked to see if the project complies with them or not. The second step is to describe and list the project in the registries. The project documentation is prepared by VNV, and the local stakeholder consultation is conducted, wherein a meeting is conducted with the stakeholders affected from the project to get their feedbacks, if any. VNV then opens an account with the chosen registry and then submits the project for listing. VNV already has an account with Gold Standard and Vera. The third step is to validate the project for the registration in the carbon registries. So VNV's role here is to contract a validation or a verification body or a third-party auditor to validate the project, which is followed by the registration of the project. The fourth step is after the project is successfully registered, and it is one of the crucial steps, that is to verify the achieved emission reductions or removals. During this step, VNV, in collaboration with the implementer, monitors and records the data to calculate the actual emission reductions or removals achieved by the project during the particular period, and that is followed by the VVV verification or the third-party verification. The last step is the issuance of credits, which occurs after the approval of the auditor and the registries. And these credits are then deposited to the VNV's account, which may be held, sold, or retired. Next slide, please. Thank you. So moving on to biochar, which has been a new concept that has been introduced in the carbon market, and it has a lot of opportunities. Most of us here are experts on biochar. However, I just wanted to mention some points for the freshers who have joined the seminar today. So biochar is a solid and stabilized carbon material formed by thermochemical processing of biomass in an oxygen-limited environment. It acts as a significant natural carbon storehouse, and biochar was among the IPCC's shortlisted of negative emission technologies that could provide a significant sequestration impact or a sink. In 2019, biochar was listed for the first time on a voluntary carbon marketplace in Finland with Puro.earth. And in 2020, a second voluntary marketplace called Carbon Future began to list carbon removal credits for biochar. Next slide, thank you. So we have few methodologies as mentioned by Enid, which focuses on biochar. One of them has been introduced by Puro.earth and the other one has been introduced by Vera very recently on August 2022, which is the VM0044 methodology for biochar utilization in soil and non-soil applications. Next slide. Thank you. So this slide specifically focuses on Puro.earth biochar methodology. It quantifies the net CO2 removal achieved over the time, a horizon of 100 years, by the production of biochar when used in applications placed in the environment. The methodology has calculations for the amount of carbon dioxide removal certificates resulting from the biochar production activity over a given reporting period. That is for a given amount of biochar produced. The life cycle assessment data for the biochar used and the proof that the end use of the biochar does not cause CO2 returning to the atmosphere has to be provided. There are more conditions and requirements that needs to be complied and are mentioned in the methodology. Next slide. Thank you. So this slide specifically focuses on the Vera methodology. It predominantly focuses on the criteria and procedures for the quantification of greenhouse gas benefits following the adoption of improved waste handling and disposal of the waste biomass to produce the biochar. This methodology employs a very comprehensive monitoring and accounting framework that captures the greenhouse gas impacts in the three important stages of the biochar value chain. The first stage is the sourcing stage, where the waste biomass is sourced and collected. The second stage is the production, during which the waste biomass is thermochemically converted into biochar. And the third stage is the application stage, wherein we focus on the use of biochar in soil and the non-soil applications. The pre-project scenario or the business as usual scenario is assumed as the continuation of the pre-project waste handling and disposable practices of the waste biomass that could have been either left to decay or combusted. Again, there are certain set of applicability conditions that make the project eligible for using this methodology and get the carbon credits. To mention a few, the waste biomass should be purely biogenic and not purpose grown. There is a non-exhaustive list of waste biomass as per the methodology. To name a few, there is animal manure, wood-based feedstocks, food processing residues, etc. So the reason behind not including the purposely grown feedstock is that the methodology developers wanted this methodology to not coincide with other forestry and land use methods. And further, in terms of application of the biochar, it should be used as a soil conditioner or in cement asphalt, and any other applications where the long-term storage of the biochar is possible. It is to note here that it is not applicable if the biochar is used for energy purposes or burned as fuel or as a substitute for charcoal or coke, or used in any application where biochar cannot be demonstrated as a long-lived and persistent carbon sink. The greenhouse gas emissions are mainly calculated using the parameters like organic carbon content, mass of biochar produced, the permanence factor, and the emissions consider the flux of methane, nitrous oxide, and CO2, and are defined in terms of CO2 equivalent per year. This methodology, the Vera methodology, also states an initial assessment of activity penetration, saying that there is not enough biochar production in any country that would put the penetration below 5% threshold. This approach stipulates that the total mass of the waste biomass converted is way less than the total mass of waste biomass that is available worldwide. Hence, it creates an opportunity for the project developers to work on biochar production and register the projects in international registries of carbon market. With the adoption of the Paris Climate Accord, biochar has become one of the most recognized, most viable and accessible carbon footprint and meeting the emission reduction obligations. Yes, next slide, please. Thank you. So this slide represents what we intend to do. We seek to ensure and support implementers in registering the projects for biochar. The implementers can contact us for the same. VNV, being a project developer and carbon expert, looks for buyers and investors for the credits received. The investors are the organizations with carbon neutrality and net zero goals. We work with over 200 buyers and investors across the globe, and it increases every day. We have investors and buyers from Korea, Japan, and Singapore, etc. We work with implementers and help the communities to create a value chain and promote social activities like health, education, etc. Majority of the revenue that is generated from this carbon finance program is channeled back into the communities to continue the maintenance of the carbon offset project and improve the livelihoods of the communities. Next slide, please. Thank you. To explain further, VNV looks after the entire project technically in terms of preparing the documents, as well as financially from registration till the issuance process. At the end, the credits that is generated from the program is shared between the implementing party, which can be utilized for developing and maintaining the project, and VNV. So any additional revenue, if generated, is deployed directly towards the projects. So VNV is planning to create a program of activity on biochar in India and other South Asian countries for carbon credits. And we want to support farmers for the additional revenue generated. We have an existing program of activity on waste management in India, which is registered in gold standard as well. The next slide has our contact details. Please feel free to reach out with our projects or any queries if you have. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Debashmita. I think for organizations who are here and are interested to be part of this process, they can either get to you directly. I mean, your contact details are here on the slide and it's still projected.
Yes.
Any which way, I think, those who are new to this topic of biochar and are interested to take it, adopt it, then IBBN can always help them, all through the value chain of biochar. Yeah, thank you so much. Just wait for the questions, Debashmita. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now, we go with Dries. Dries works in Kenya, Africa, is doing his postdoctoral and has quite a bit of experience. I'm really impressed with the LinkedIn profiles of all the speakers today. Dries, welcome. Are you on mute? I can't hear you. Dries, we still can't hear you. Yeah, you're on mute.
Wait, am I now
Yes.
being heard? Yes. Okay.
Yes, this is perfect. Thank you.
Once I share my screen.
Yes, I didn't realize that Aarti Shah was also part of your group. She had a question for you on policy. Dries, already.
Okay. Okay. And now I'm trying to make myself visible. Yes. Dhanyavad, Kshichi. Sabi ko namaskar.
You're addressing one part of India.
Wait, excuse me. I know Tamil, and I should have, right? I tried. Excuse me for not being.
Oh wow, you know Tamil. That's very good. Anyway.
Yes,
go on,
I
please,
know.
yeah.
I know at least. I thank you for pointing that out. Next time I'll make sure to Google Tamil greetings. Yes. I'll be changing gears from the previous presenters who touched on both the policy frameworks, the higher level commitments in net zero, as well as the mechanisms or the verification schemes that are quickly becoming mainstream. My contribution and my background is in understanding and providing information and science evidence to close the knowledge gap that has been raised as a concern by IPCC, and also implementation models that ensure the proper rollout of say biochar value chains that ensure positive effects on people, environment, and of course long-term carbon removal. I would like to acknowledge all of the partners mentioned here, as well as funders that made this research possible. This is a selection of the research in East Africa that has taken place over the last 16 years. Next slide. First, I will touch on what happens when you put, say, a handful of biochar or a ton of biochar into the soil, both in terms of the stability and also then its carryover and residual effects on yield, fertilizer efficiency. And then next, I wanted to highlight tools to both plan your biomass catchment as well as and supply, and also utilities that help to ensure that we don't start transferring biomass from one continent to the other, which has happened with other bioenergy solutions. So the sites where we have worked in Uganda and Kenya are indicated there on the map. Here we look at data from the longest running biochar trial on the African continent. It started in 2006 and we're still maintaining it thanks to the support in the last 2 years from GIZ and before from Swedish funders and other global networks. What we look at here on the left are results from the carbon stock measured by taking the bulk density and total carbon measurement at 2 different depths for the 3 main treatments with and without biochar. And to be very clear, to note to you, this has been a one-time biochar application at the start of the experiment 16 years ago at 35 tons carbon per hectare. And the crop and the crop plus fertilizer treatment have an annual maize soybean rotation. Fertilizer is DAP at 60 kilograms nitrogen, 23 kilograms phosphorus for the agronomic geeks here. But more importantly is now in 2022, earlier this year, we did a sampling to trace the fate of the soil carbon stock when applying biochar. And as you see in the light colored boxes for the non-biochar amended treatment, you actually see that there is an increase in soil carbon stock by cropping and also by nourishing that crop with inorganic fertilizer. And that biochar addition persistently increases the total soil carbon stock. Yet what we see is that by cropping and also by adding inorganic fertilizer, the total soil carbon gain is reduced. Now, this actually flags to us that that there is actually when you apply biochar, you stimulate crop and the input, the carbon input from crops, but you also tend to stimulate decomposition of biochar, or as well its movement in the soil profile. And I'll touch on that in the next slide. But that's a very important consideration that you, and in many of, I'm not an expert on credit systems, but we should be very wary, and still there's a lot of data to be collected on the long-term fate of the carbon, and also definitely considering how the biochar derived carbon and the plant derived carbon contribute to the overall and long-term say behavior of the soil carbon stock. Yes, next here, this is this chart shows us the share of the soil carbon gain for the biochar enriched treatments in the 0 to 20 centimeters and 20 to 50 centimeters horizon. Although they have different weights and they cover different depths, actually what you see is that there is when cropped, when the biochar enriched field is cropped compared to the fallow, which was bare, which was kept bare, the major gain in soil carbon happens in the topsoil, while in the bottom part there is less, notwithstanding that almost 40% of the overall gain happens below 20 centimeters. And in many cases, agronomists, but also land use modelers, and a lot of the data on soil carbon stocks is for the top 20 centimeters, top 50 centimeters at most. But this flags to us that there is an important transfer of carbon, and this can be both biochar derived and plant derived, deeper into the soil. I refer to these pictures from a study in Liberia, where this is a natural black or dark earth soil, where you see that the char is visibly moved down by more than 1 meter into the soil profile. So that process is very critical to account for the overall effect of biochar soil amendment on carbon sequestration in soils. Yeah, here in this for this study, which is forthcoming, we have actually realized we need to take samples below 50 centimeters to really see how the carbon content and stock behave further down. And we'll also do an isotope tracing study to distinguish what is plant-derived and biochar-derived carbon. Then further, I wanted to present to you the effect on above ground carbon. We have looked below ground in the soil carbon stock, but now above ground, what we noticed in the first decade of the experiment, which has been published, we see a persistent and recurrent increase in yield for when you apply biochar, right? This and especially when combined with fertilizer, well known. And if you compare the yields for the crop with fertilizer, and then by adding biochar, you get 1.2 tons of maize grain extra, or a half a ton of soybean each season. And also the seasonal yield variability, which is an indicator for resilience to weather and climate variation, decreases, meaning there's less fluctuation in that between the seasons. So if you take a some quick math, crude, the yield gain you get by adding biochar onto the fertilized crop is 1.2 ton grain. If you multiply that with a harvest index of say 2, you get 2.4 ton residue, stover residue per hectare more each season. Then a 30% recovery of that stover as biochar in a pyrolysis system gives you 0.8 ton biochar per hectare, and a 50% fixed carbon content gives you about 0.4 ton of carbon per hectare per season. And over 10 years in a rotation, that adds up to 8 tons of biochar per hectare and 4 tons of carbon, or 8.8 tons of CO2 per hectare added by a one-time application of biochar. I forgot to mention this in this experiment, the residue that was produced every season was not recycled. Then for sake of time here as well, an added benefit, and which shouldn't be overlooked in both agronomic terms, but also climate financing, is the improvement of fertilizer use efficiency and the reduced losses that are achieved through biochar application. This is from another study where lower rates of biochar here, as you see, 1 to 10 ton of biochar were applied without and with fertilizer. And you clearly see that there is a higher uptake of that fertilizer when you apply the biochar, and the yields also go up as you apply more biochar, making both a saving in terms of hard cash, but also in terms of like emissions, which still have to be further established. But there are studies that indicate that fertilizer-derived emissions reduced by application of biochar to agricultural systems. So a not insignificant part of the climate impact and offsets of greenhouse gas emissions that needs to be included in some of the credit frameworks. Then, having touched on both on what happens when you apply biochar to the field, this is a study and approaches to allow you to plan the sourcing of your biomass. This was a study in Uganda, and just want to quickly feature, these are the 3 steps that we used to do so, to quantify how much residues are available based on allometric relationships. This can also be done by growth models. Second step is then based on surveys with farmers, we look at their the different uses of those residues together, because not all residue is equally available. And then lastly, you simulate this in mass balance models that look at both input and decomposition. And what we found here for the Uganda case is that actually at smallholder farms and fields, you can, with a common maize groundnut rotation, actually under measured availabilities, you can achieve that illustrious 4 per mil target in the field. And at the same time, with all those residues and with those models, you can upscale your residue availability at regional and national scale. And we found that from those 5 crops, maize, sorghum, rice, millet, and groundnut, the residues used in a cook stove, like the example here, can offset and substitute wood fuel for 1 to 6.3 million people. And the biochar derived from that can offset between 19 and 77% of Uganda's CO2 emissions. Now, I'm seeing my time is up. Here I want to flag, in Kenya, we have now embarked on a project where we establish closed loop value chains in the tea sector that ensure the quality of biomass feedstocks is assured, that there is a fair price for the pickers and new and additional income for them, that the whole supply and value chain is coordinated from the garden to the factory, where both power and heat will be generated, and then it's recycling of the biochar back into the field, all with end-to-end traceability, so we know at any point for any batch where the biomass originated from and how the biochar is cascading back. For that, there are existing software and models that can be used to optimize the sourcing and aggregation of that all to ensure the lowest cost and emission penalty of that hauling, feedstock hauling, say, and also aligning that with local demand for biochar and other renewable heat purposes, electricity and heat use. Yes, these are the key takeaways, but I'll leave it at that and take them with questions. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Dries. You know, there's this contradiction between, you know, the carbon storage reducing, you know, if biochar is applied along with inorganic fertilizer. And this is something which we might have to look at in the Q&A session on how we are going to manage that. And there is also this aspect on whether the same thing applies when you apply organic fertilizer along with biochar in terms of the carbon storage and the yield. We'll get to that a little later. My issue, of course, with both your presentation, Dries, as well as Professor Annet's presentation, is on how to take this to the farmers and how they understand this in a very simplified manner, and are also able to use both analytical tools as well as scientific methodologies, you know, in their farms, especially in the Global South. We really look forward to that and a longer-term collaboration with you and Annette and the others. I welcome Suzanne Faeser from Germany. She was the first to wake up. I'm really sorry, Suzanne. You know, for our colleagues in India, there's almost a 10-hour difference between Professor Annette and Professor Suzanne. Suzanne is in Germany. She woke up at 30 past 4 in the morning. Sorry for that. I hope you're fresh enough to to speak along. The floor is yours, Suzanne.
Yeah, thank you, Gigi, so much for your introduction. And I want to make up a little bit of time here with my presentation because a lot I had on my slides, we already seen from Annette and Dries and also Debo Schmitter. Yeah, but I want to tell you a little bit about the biochar market in Europe. We had the opportunity to get fresh numbers from the European Biochar Industry Consortium, with which we collaborate really good, and this is a good thing for us as well, for the Biochar Association. As you know, now I'm the founder and also the first chair of the German Biochar Association. We founded it in February 2017 with for about 36 people together with me, and now we are more than 220 people, members, which held high the flag of the biochar here in Germany. But we have also members from Austria, Switzerland, Serbia, Finland. So yeah, we are kind of in between, only national-wide and European-wide. I'm supported from 6 other people in the chair, and we have a lot of work to do. So we had established a team which helps us to do this big amount of work, which every day comes in. And we are very happy that this increases too, because this shows the awareness. What is biochar? I can skip. Yeah, you see, I did a bit in a hurry because we are late in time now. So what you also said, our Annette showed the honeycomb structure of biochar, which brings all these good possibilities when we use biochar in the ground. Actually, we are mostly looking at the agricultural use in Germany and Europe as well. But if we have later, we have much more opportunities to put biochar into our cities. In Germany, we have a lot of problems about the stormwater events, which are increasing also with the temperature of a climate, and we have to build up sponge cities. So we would use the water absorption capacity, hopefully more and more in the next years, to create these sponge cities, which help to save the people in the cities. Yeah, what we had in our head when we established the German Biochar Association was to increase the number of people who know about it and also to use it, and that we achieve that they will get their credits when they do this. So I have to put it a little bit away. Yeah. So because the world is not only a good place, and there are also some black sheep sometimes, we decided after 1 year that we have to establish a code of ethics, that is committed to the environmental protection, because not anything that is black is really good biochar, and therefore our members, they have to sign this code of ethics to join the Biochar Association. But this signature makes proof that if you have a partner from our association, he is in the best way looking after the environment and do not want to have only greenwashing doing. So what is now? My slide will not want. Oh, next is in these 5 years we achieved a little bit, not as much perhaps we were dreaming in the past, but I think it was a lot, because we got also not only funds which have aware that biochar would be a good thing for the environment, like the Bloomberg Philanthropies. They funded last year 7 cities around the globe, also in the US, which asked for the funding. And one of these cities is the city of Darmstadt, where we had our last conference in November. This was really good, a big and successful conference. We had also a chance to look at a new plant, which was which runs now for about 2 months in the city of Darmstadt, using not wood chips, but left greenery waste, and also the sieve overflow from the composting plant. So we are going to close the loop. So some political understanding we could also achieve talking directly to some politicians, but I think there are too much politicians which are unfamiliar to the subject of biochar, and also to the possibilities which biochar uses for our challenges in cities here in Germany. But we have a good development about the biochar market. I had to ask European Biochar Industry Consortium, because they did this market report for the last year and also for this year. We are good co-workers, and this is really, I'm happy that we can share our knowledge, and this is also the thing I think we should establish here in India, that you have this network as you started it, and it is so great to see these hundreds of people which are here and organizations, because this is really important that we can go quick into the right decisions. So what can we see regarding the development? Oh, sorry, this was too fast, because I have to change my. So now I can see my slide. In 2021, we had already 25 biochar production plants installed. The forecast was that 32 projects had to be installed in 2021. But as you all know, we had not only the corona pandemic, as you all over the world, but we are also directly in focus when we look to the Ukrainian war about materials shortage and something like this. So there were 12 of them in delay, and only completed in 2022. But 5 projects weren't on the radar on the European Biochar Industry Consortium. So surprised, 5 new projects were completed in 2021. So actually we in 2021 the cumulative number of installed biochar production plants has grown to more than 100 installations, and almost 80 of them were with a production capacity from more than 200 tons per year. So these plants are not these small stuffs, but really industrial solutions. In this year, 2022, we are our European Biochar Industry Consortium, and also the German Biochar Association is looking on 44 projects under construction or under contract. So perhaps many further projects are in an advanced planning and permitting process. So when we see this rise of this growth, it is really encouraging. And I hope that this increasing of building of plants will spread all over the world. So we could get the most of it in a short time. If you look, no, next slide, please. No, I have to do it my own. So if you look now the average growth rate, we expected it, about 50%, but when we look at 2021, it was more than 70%, and for 2022, the growth is expected to be more than 85%. This is average growth rate about 50%, and in the next 3 years we expect this 67%. This is really a fast-growing market, and it is amazing that it is going up this way. So, what can we say about the biochar production? This biochar production increased also almost to 40,000 tons as an actual biochar production per year. And this means this is equivalent to about 100,000 tons of CO2 reduction out of the atmosphere. So this is what makes biochar or PIGS by far today's most relevant industrial negative emission technology, because we speak a lot about this sea removal technology, but as I'm aware, nothing has this kind of technical readiness than we have it already with the pyrolysis plants. What also was a good thing that for about 10 years ago, the European Biochar certificate was installed. As I mentioned formerly, we do not want to have a greenwashing, and also not have a greenwashing system, because we have a drastic situation to see, as Anna just showed us in her first presentation. And we do not have the time to deal with black sheeps and greenwashing. So European Biochar certificate gives also security, not only to the producers that their plant is working in a good manner, but also for the customers who want to buy and use the biochar. The EBC classes are developed as well in the last 10 years. We have now several classes which helps to use and find out the right biomass or biochar for your kind of using it. When you perhaps use only or need only carbon sequestration by perhaps also soil improvement, but not for farming, but for the hold back of stormwater in cities, you will not need EBC agro-organic or EBC feed. It would be enough to use EBC agro. So in these EBC classes, it is regulated what you are used to, what you are permitted to use as feedstock, and also if the energy efficient if the production is energy efficient, and you can also use this for the calculation of the carbon sink potential when you use EBC zinc. The characteristics, it is early in the morning. The characteristics we measure here is about the C content, the pH, heavy metals, and PAHs. So we have more trends beyond the general growth, and this is also amazing to see that more and more equipment manufacturers establish several new plants and technologies which are on the market, and we need them. We also need the entering of the biochar market of bigger players from Europe industry, and we see that there is greater awareness now. Actually, we have at least 7 companies that have been operating commercial plants for several years, and most of them with an installed number of systems in the low to mid double-digit range. Yeah. I prefer these mid-range numbers, because we make sure that the feedstock we use in these mid plants is from the direct environment and not shipped from overbroad or something else, which we couldn't say if we have to feed a big plant here in Europe, because we do not have this big amount of biomass from forests and so on. So we also already buy a lot of biomass from overbroad. And it wouldn't be environmental friendly to use them to produce biochar. Yeah, so we have to be careful, as Dries also mentioned before, to look, what kind of bio feedstock I will have to produce biochar in a local environment. So there is also more awareness about the fossil carbon in metallurgy to replace and also to replace activated carbons from overbroad, for example, Philippines. But this is not a negative emission technology when you burn it. So activated carbon, you can use it after use in a co-composting system and bring it back to the ground. But if you burned it, it is no negative emission, though it is only replace of fossils, but sometimes this will do as well. That the EBC certificate is becoming more and more widespread in whole Europe is clearly the established quality standard for biochar. And I would be really happy if you would achieve to establish some quality standard for biochar also in India, because we have to make sure that we only bring a good and healthful biochar for the soil into the soil. The EBC zinc was not mentioned in the presentation of De Bushmita, but also the Carbon Future company. So I think you're aware, and I perhaps could make an exchange about VNV and Carbon Future to working together, because they created a tracking system which would be able to see that the biochar is really ended in the soil and in our burning or incineration plant. So the summary is a good summary, a good one. The market is increasing. We have already 100,000 tons of CO2 sequestered by the production in Europe. We are also aware that most of the plants are established in Germany, Switzerland, Austria, and Sweden. So we have a big possibility in Europe to increase this market as well. And what we also have to say that the biochar production technology is mature with at least 10 serious EU technology providers, from which is at least 5 are at technical readiness level 8+. So we can recommend this kind of technology to use and to install all over the world. But we can also recommend to get into technical exchange and learn and spread the news about what is a good functioning plant and what are critical spots in the plants. Yeah, among the industrial and negative emissions technology solutions, biochar is easiest to scale and to significant volumes in the near term. So we have to do it. This is my most message here for you all. And if you want to read a little bit more about the possibilities of biochar, I would also recommend the European Biochar Industry White Paper. They wrote it or they brought it into the market on October 2020, and it is reworked already, but you will find a lot of things about the research of the last 5 years, as Dries said, and because we learned a lot about how biochar is functioning in the soil, and this is not, you put it in the ground and everything is good. You have to see what we have to use for several purposes. So what we need in future, in my opinion, is quick understanding of the German politicians or European politicians about the chances biochar offers. As Annette mentioned, IPCC is not up to date with biochar. They mentioned it, but I hope in the next we will read a little more about the possibilities for the politicians and decision makers. Yeah. So what we also should increase is getting these cycles closed by using harmless bio-waste. I think I learned all over the world it is done already. Germany has a little bit of problems. They would prefer only wood as a source, even if we learned that some other materials would be much more better to improve the soil and the yields of we can harvest. Yeah, so research funds for this basic research with charcoal, for which application and further demonstrations pilots would be really necessary. Yeah. And also financial incentive for them who uses biochar as a CO2 reducing climate cooling system in their fields. Yeah, this is what I think, but we can talk about what you have in your mind to make better and to do how to boost the biochar use all over the world. Thank you so much for your attention, and perhaps we can go to the discussion now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. I think of all the other things that you mentioned, two things which caught my mind, because it's also so very important for us to follow that up. One is the white paper that you already have. We don't have a white paper here. We are in the process of generating one, along with Jonas and GIZ. We're getting together as a team to create a white paper. The second, of course, is the European biochar standards. You've developed this over years, and there's so much more clarity on biochar standards in Europe. We don't have standards here in India, and that is also something that we're following up. And these are two very, very serious policy work that IBBN has taken up along with GIZ here in the country. Yeah, thank you so much, Suzanne. And now we get into the question and answer session. There are two ways of doing it. All the speakers have now been enabled to raise their hands, and you can also unmute yourself and ask questions. We will identify the people who can go first. The second thing that we could probably do is there are already some questions that we've been able to classify and categorize, and we could probably ask those questions on your behalf. Yeah, and I see that Aarti Shah, as well as Professor Annette and Deboshmita have already tried to answer some of your questions. And beyond these, also there are certain questions that you may want to ask. So if you want to ask your questions directly, please raise your hands, and we'll allow you to go there directly. I can. Siddharth, can you go first?
Yeah. Yeah, hello, good morning, everyone, and thank you all for your amazing presentations, very informative. My question, and I think that is more for Deboshmita, would be that do biochar projects really have a lock-in period for farmers? And if yes, what would that be? Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Siddharth, for your question. So the lock-in period, basically in carbon market, it refers to the crediting period. So a particular project may have 5 years or more than 5 years of crediting period. So the credits can be given to the project for either 5 years or more than 5 years. That is the 15 years lock-in period that we have for a particular project. Yes.
Okay, but in terms of holding the practice of putting biochar in the soil, I mean, that is only for the crediting period, or because, for example, with regenerative farming, the projects are like for 20 years minimum that they need to do regenerative farming. So I was like, so what if after 5 years the farmer decides that I no longer want to put biochar and stops it and opens up the land? What happens to the carbon?
So the methodology that these carbon markets have, they predominantly focus on the biochar production that has been done. And the end use that has been done for the biochar can be either soil application or any other applications related to construction, and the ones that can, demonstrate that it has a longevity. So if the farmers, tend to see that after 5 years, we don't want to use the biochar as a soil application, it can be used for any other application. So the credits are basically on the amount of biochar that has been produced. So adding in the end use is one of the requirements that you have to do to see the longevity.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Siddharth. Thank you. Thank you for that. We could probably follow this up and take it offline.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Marga, we have Prabhakar from Marga. We also have Anselm, who's asked questions, as well as Rajini Rao. So we could go with Prabhakar first from Marga. You'll have to unmute yourself, Prabhakar.
Sir, namaste.
Prabhakar.
Namaste.
Hello.
One ನಿಮಿಷ ಪ್ರಭಾಕರ್
hello.
ಒಂದ್ ನಿಮಿಷ ಪ್ರಭಾಕರ್ ಮಾರ್ಗದ ಪ್ರಭಾಕರ್ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ.
Hello.
ಹೇಳಿ ಇಂಗ್ಲಿಷ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಹೇಳಿ ಪ್ರಭಾಕರ್.
Sir, yes, good afternoon. The presentations were, for me, it was a little difficult because there are some, I am to inform myself in much more deeper way. But then what I thought is that in the initial days that instead of imposing the pressure of producing the biochar, do we have methods that where the biochars can be manufactured and given to the farmers so that it can be a plus point and encouragement for them to experiment, and it can be initiated so that, because now I think both the burden of production and usage has pushed to the farmers. So will it be possible for some initiatives to produce biochar in bulk and as a propagation method that we can take it to the farmers?
Okay, any of our colleague speakers can respond to this. He says the burden of production as well as for application now with farmers now. Can he suggest that as a matter of incentivization, that the government can probably take up production through some entity and then hand it over to farmers? Jonas, you may also want to go at it.
I can respond to that question because it's actually a very important and good question. We have also realized, especially in India, that putting the burden to the farmer of collecting, producing, and again reapplying the biochar might not be as feasible as we wished for at the beginning. So what we are currently testing as GIZ with our partners is to develop respective business models where we include our FPOs either local NGOs or FPOs on the ground who can take up that responsibility. So is there a possibility to select, let's say, a certain association, a farmer producing organization, to take care of this entire, let's say, value chain, collecting the idle lying crop residues, producing the biochar with also recognized technologies, which can then also be recognized for the voluntary carbon market. And then also not reselling the biochar to the farmer, but also then immediately combining it with nutrients, converting it into terra preta, because only then it has a positive impact on the soil as well as also on the crops. So that could be one solution we are currently looking at to incentivize it for farmers so that they don't have to take care of that burden, but also that they get a, let's say, a ready-made product, which they can then again reapply for low cost. And that is also the connection I wanted to highlight here again, because what we are currently facing in India is that, I mean, you all are aware of it, 70% of the farmers in India are still low-income, marginalized, small-scale farmers. The technologies applicable for them to produce biochar are not up to the mark right now at this current stage to really be incentivized with voluntary carbon markets. The technologies to use biochar, to produce biochar, and also to reduce the amount of greenhouse gases during the production is still currently too high for voluntary carbon markets. And that could also be minimized if we set up local production units controlled and managed by farmer producing organizations. And then also again, getting the certificates, getting the recognition by international carbon schemes that this application, that this monitoring, that also making sure that the resources are collected from the right sources, that this is under one roof, under one management unit, just to assure that there's no, misleading consumption, corruption, greenwashing, all of these issues we have heard earlier in the presentation. So, I mean, in short, we are testing this out currently. We have viable business models in place. We would like to also use this network, IBBN, to scale these viable business models to make them available also to other regions in India. And also, last sentence, not only looking at, let's say, farm level or remote level production units, but also is there a possibility to increase or scale this entire, let's say, system to urban areas? Can we reintroduce also urban waste, urban bio waste back to the farm, either by producing compost or also by producing biochar, which can then again be reintroduced to local farms. I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Jonas.
Thank you.
Susan Feza also talks about the possibilities of farmers' cooperatives taking this forward. There is an issue of social justice here, because when the business opportunities are so great, there is always a potential, or there's always a scare that large companies would take this over. And to ensure that the remuneration comes back to or accrues in the accounts of farmers would be so very useful. Any other question? Rajani, would you want to go, or do you feel your questions have already been answered?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think Professor Annette answered me. But I was looking at a rough estimate, mainly because it's very difficult. I'm also learning to be a farmer. How do I decide? Because if I'm planning this, there must be some rough figures on how it's computed. For example, in very vast spaces like fruit orchards, some wood stock available, you would think that it is possible to generate. So what are the kind of figures we have to even plan if we want to go in for this? Biochar production, and is it feasible? How do we even compute it? And like somebody suggested, it shouldn't be that we are emitting more than we actually, are producing for sequestration. So are these numbers available for India based on what kind of orchard, farm?
Yeah. Thanks for the Rajni. All these numbers are available, but I would request the speakers to probably respond to you. There are two parts to a question. One was, of course, on the production and the application bit. The other is to compute. When you say compute, it's to compute to monetize it, right? Because the first bit is also about the nutrient content and the impact of biochar. And then there's the monetization bit. There were these two questions that you probably
monetization. I'm not aware at all. So it's more like it shouldn't be emitting more than I'm actually planning to sequester and utilize.
That's been taken care of. But then I would want to have one of our speakers respond. Annette, do you want to respond to Rajni?
Yes, I was just going to explain the point that I put into the chat, which is that the International Biochar Initiative is currently undertaking a project, call it the NDC Framework Project, and their main aim is to develop a simple estimator so that countries can estimate the mitigation potential of biochar. But it's incorporating some simple life cycle assessment approaches. So it's not quite available yet, but they demonstrated it on the IBI conference last night. It looks like it's very near to being ready to be used. They're also demonstrating it for Egypt and Colombia, including the assessment of biomass availability. And so they're doing a total calculation of mitigation for the country. But the factors that they have put together for this calculation method, I think will make it easy for anybody to apply the same approach for their project, for example.
Yeah, what about this question, Annette, on the emissions during the production of biochar? I mean, would that be more than the carbon that you sequester?
Yes, it is really important that the biochar is made carefully. If you have an engineered facility that's processing tons per hour in a developed country that's under an environmental protection license, it's going to have air emissions controls, and you can be confident that it's not releasing emissions that are counteracting the benefits. However, the traditional charcoal making process, if you're familiar with it, is very smoky, and it actually produces methane as well. And so you could, in fact, have a negative climate effect if you make biochar in the same way as the traditional charcoal making processes. So it's important that the gases released are combusted or otherwise, combusted by flaring them, or otherwise captured and used as an energy source is of course a whole lot better. So I also put in the chat a link to a guide that was produced by a Jeff project to help people to operate a kiln accurately so that it doesn't release gases. And hopefully that's useful for you.
Thank you. Thank you. Susan, you have a question. Susan?
Yes, I have a question. I would like to ask, in the primary production of biochar, since in the primary production of biochar, biochar is produced from biomass, the products which are usually in the environment, or let's say in this term, in the farm, like the waste leaves or the products which are left on the farm after a harvest, such things are the ones which put the primary nutrients into the soil. So these are the things which we take, and through pyrolysis, we produce biochar. So I'm asking, how will that be sustained if those biomass are being taken for the production of biochar? How will that cycle feel? How will the gap left in the biomass for the production of biochar be filled? Because we cannot just take the biomass for production of biochar and leave out the importance of what it was doing in the first place. For example, let's say after harvest of beans, the biomass that is left is the stems or the pods which introduce the nitrogen into the soil. So when we take a percentage of this, we also take a percentage of the nutrients which are being taken from the soil. So how will that gap be filled? How will that gap of nitrogen being taken from the soil be filled? Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. Dreer, do you want to respond to Susan?
Yes, yes. A very important and pertinent question is one, biochar should not go for biomass that has a lower carbon to nitrogen ratio, like legume stover. That's actually should be composted and it's nitrogen recycled to the field without pyrolysis, which blasts off all of the nitrogen. So selecting biomass feedstocks based on carbon to nitrogen ratio is one very important criterion. And then also next to that, as I showed in the paper, we need to look at excess, what is not being used for livestock feeding, and in many cases is removed or burned without being reapplied to the field. Next to that, we need to be wary that, for example, high carbon to nitrogen ratio feedstocks like maize or cereal stover, they tend to immobilize nitrogen, while with biochar that is not the case. So there are many feedbacks that have to be considered, and also competitive uses and other criterions that are very clear to choose the right type and sustainable sourcing of biomass.
Thanks so much for that good question, Susan. I think we need to be, there's a lot of caveats on the kind of feedstock that we use, and thanks for that response, Priya. Before we end the session with one single remark from all the four speakers, there's this one last question from Sriram Bharathan. Sriram, can you ask your question, please, and also try and turn your video on?
Thanks, Sapich. Hi, everyone. My question is to Debashmita. So you had indicated that biochar briquettes cannot be used as a source of energy. What if biochar briquettes are used in a renewable energy plant? Would they still be eligible for generating credits?
Yes, they will be. And since the methodology just states on replacing it with charcoal or coke, so using it as a renewable energy can be applicable for this methodology.
Okay, thank you so much. Back to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was a short question. Sriram, I hope the answer was clear. We could always take this up with the VNV. I mean, you had already shown interest in working together with IBBN. I think we need to pursue that. Yeah. So thank you. We've kind of shot 5 minutes beyond our time, but then with so much of content and so many, speakers with so much of experience, I guess it's worth it to have these 5 minutes, extra 5 minutes. I request the four speakers to say a few words on how we could probably take this association together. I mean, when people come together, there are a lot of possibilities. And then looking at it from a climate perspective, it's really not just about one hamlet or one city. It's about continents, people in various continents coming together. It's a global response that is required. So in that context, one statement from each of you would be very useful. Thank you. We could probably go chronologically like we did before. So we start with Professor Anand.
Thank you very much. I don't think I'm very well equipped to answer that question for India, so I'll let others talk about the specifics of that. But I just wanted to let people know that there's a lot of information from the International Biochar Initiative, and also I put some of the links there in the chat, that has been generated over the past 10 years from some projects which I think are very relevant to what you're trying to do here. And that remember that the policymakers have some concerns, and they would like to see that there are measures in place to manage the quality control issues, the issues that have been raised about extracting biomass unsustainably, and the land grabbing possibilities. So while biochar has a lot of opportunities and a bright future, I think there are some risks that do need to be managed, and the I think the industry and the community need to work together to find the appropriate governance approaches to each of the countries for them to manage that. Thank you.
Sorry, thanks so much, Professor Debashmita. You're muted.
Hello. So my last points would be to, since this market has a lot of opportunities and there are a lot of methodologies that are coming up, and we are focusing on, registering these projects since it's a very new thing in the carbon market. So at the end, we want to, connect with the implementers and see if the project meets the criterias and how it benefits the farmers and the implementers and the communities as well. So at the end, yes, we have to work on this. And since it's a new term, there can be a lot of drawbacks or a lot of things that might create a confusion. But at the end, we will surely support them in terms of the carbon market.
Thank you. Thanks for the Debashmita. Just hang on for a bit. Dries?
Good. Yeah, Xiqi. Mine would be for the Indian Biochar and Bioresource Network and any working group that spins off from it, is to identify specific knowledge and needs for information materials on specific topics discussed here today or beyond that. And with that, to actually request different donors, funders, interest groups and research organizations to produce, say, very practical briefs on those topics. Because not everyone has the time and also the sufficient say background knowledge to understand all the research papers that are out there. So as a movement and as a group, you can identify key and priority knowledge gaps that need to be addressed for moving this forward. And not only knowledge, but also enablers. What are the technologies, the kind of tools that will be required for, say, farmers of different walks and different capital and financial prowess to be able to start up, to take part, engage in biochar value chains and beyond that. So,
thank you. Thanks for this, Dries. We look forward to collaborating with you on the knowledge front, as well as I think this very important need for South Asia and Africa to come together on this, especially given the socioeconomic background, which are fairly similar. Yeah,
Africa outpaces the Asia Pacific, because the growth of the market was said to be biggest in Asia Pacific, but Africa is a sleeping giant, if I may use those words.
Yeah, Suzanne.
Yeah, thank you. I think this event was a good starting point for getting in more working together, building up networks, because I think, we need these practical projects, and we also need the guidance for the farmers and people who want to use the biochar, but we also need this close exchange to show what happens here, what happens there, what did we learn, because we do not have to invent the wheel for ourselves, everybody. So I was really happy to be here with you all here, and I would be also happy if you write me if you have some questions, if you want to collaborate with German designers, plant designers or whatever. And I think this is the beginning perhaps of a wonderful friendship.
Yeah, I think so too, Suzanne. I think those are warm words to probably end the session. There have been requests for the PowerPoint presentations to be sent out to the participants. I will individually ask you if that's possible and if it's okay for us to do that. I mean, any which way, the YouTube is there, so that's saved. So people might want to watch just the YouTube rather than ask for presentations. But if they want to also probably quote from your presentation, it might be good that that you're connected directly, so they can talk to you and they can seek your permission. Yeah, so I'll write to you on the mail to get your permission on that. The second, of course, bit is about the future of the biochar market. Like all of you said, there are things that we need to be concerned about. We need to be aware of. No one is promoting this as a panacea for climate change as we see today, but we are only exploring, number one, the potential of biochar to sequester carbon and to improve the soil health, and number two is the business possibilities of it, for farmers who are involved, and that's something that we are really seriously looking at. So it's a huge market potential that exists, and we might have to work together both on science as well as on the market fronts. So I would take this opportunity on behalf of IBBN, Revitalizing Rainfed Agriculture Network, and GIZ in India to thank all the speakers. All the chats have been saved, so your questions will be sent out to the speakers. And whenever they find time, and obviously they're very busy, we would expect them to answer those questions, and we will mail it back to you. Please register yourself on the IBBN website. So for a closer knit collaboration between all the participants. Yeah. So thank you, Suzanne. Did I see you typing a chat into the box? Yeah. So I look forward to it. Thank you so much, Professor Annette.
This was really a private one for Susan from Kenya, because we are thinking about establishing a project in Kenya on this. Is also, I want to talk to Dries in the end, but he has to send me his email address first.
Thank you. So thank you. Yeah, it's good that these collaborations are getting established across the world. Thank you, Professor Annette. It's late for you in the evening, and we will definitely take your advice, especially in South Asia and Southeast Asia. Your ability, not only in science, but also your work with the government there in the New South Wales, will be so very useful for us to draft policies and white papers. Thank you so much. Debashmita, we will work with VNV. I saw Sandeep here. I do not know if he's Sandeep, the co-founder of VNV Advisory, but we worked with you. We look forward to having a much larger collaboration with you on biochar going forward. Dr. Dries, your work in Africa is so very important. I think you also brought in a lot of those points which are so very important for us to note and to address when we are looking at the science of biochar. And I think your response to Susan on the choice of feedstock is so very important too. And so thank you for participating. And Suzanne, you've been inspiring us. We've spoken to you 4 or 5 months ago, and we've come a long way since then in trying to build this network as well as to understand biochar in India much more. Thanks all of you, and have a good day, good evening, and good night wherever you are, and we hope to catch up with you soon. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thanks. Thank you so much. Thanks, Annette. Thanks, Dries, and Suzanne and Debashmita. Thank you so much. Thanks, Archana. Bye.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Archana.